INFJs have a way of moving through conflict in a unique style. On the outside, they appear gentle, quiet, and almost disinterested in confrontation. But beneath that calm exterior is a deeply strategic mind that can outmaneuver people without raising their voice or making a scene. Their intelligence isn't loud or dramatic. It's subtle, psychological, and rooted in a profound understanding of human nature. And when an INFJ feels betrayed, manipulated, or threatened, they switch into a mode that many people never see coming. This is where their genius shines the most, because they don't just confront their enemies. They confuse them, disarm them, and make it impossible to predict what they'll do next. If you want to truly understand yourself and unlock your full potential as an INFJ, check out the INFJ Purpose Compass today. The link is in the description of this video. One of the INFJ's greatest advantages is how well they read people. They have an almost eerie ability to sense motives, hidden agendas, emotional undercurrents, and unspoken intentions. An enemy may think they're keeping their scheme under wraps, but an INFJ often notices the first crack long before anyone else. They can catch changes in tone, inconsistencies in someone's story, micro-expressions, or even the emotional energy that shifts when someone isn't being truthful. This early detection allows INFJs to prepare long before their enemy even realizes they've been found out, giving them the strategic upper hand from the very beginning. Once they detect a threat, INFJs often pretend not to notice. Their enemies keep plotting, believing they're successfully pulling strings, while the INFJ quietly gathers information, observes patterns, and analyzes behavior from a distance. This feigned obliviousness is one of the most disorienting things about them. Their calm, unbothered demeanor makes the other person underestimate them. The INFJ is, internally, several steps ahead, sometimes imagining multiple outcomes in detail, evaluating the psychology of their opponent, and planning subtle countermoves that never look like countermoves. Their foe thinks they're in control, when in reality, they're acting inside a mental maze the INFJ already designed. Another powerful tactic INFJs use is strategic silence. They can withdraw just enough to make the other person unsure of what they know or how they feel. Silence becomes a weapon because it forces people to project their own fears, guilt, or insecurities into the blank space. While others rush to explain themselves, justify their actions, or try to regain control, the INFJ remains unreadable. Their lack of reaction confuses manipulative individuals who rely on emotional responses to gauge the strength of their influence. With an INFJ, that emotional feedback loop is gone, leaving their enemy swinging blindly. INFJs also understand timing better than most people. They know when to attack an issue head-on and when to wait, watch, and allow a situation to reveal itself fully. Sometimes the most powerful move they make is letting their enemies expose themselves. An INFJ can sit back, seemingly passive, while someone digs their own grave. By not reacting immediately, they give the manipulator time to contradict themselves, reveal their true intentions, or eventually slip up due to overconfidence. When the truth finally surfaces, the INFJ calmly presents everything they've observed, often in a way that leaves the other person stunned by how much they had picked up all along. There's also the INFJ emotional mirroring. INFJs can subtly reflect someone's own tone, behavior, or emotional energy back at them, not in a manipulative way, but in a deeply intuitive one. With an adversary, this mirroring becomes a tool. It exposes inconsistencies or destabilizes someone who's trying to play emotional games. A manipulator who tries to guilt trip an INFJ may suddenly find themselves feeling guilty. Someone trying to intimidate them may end up feeling strangely uneasy, as if their tactics have lost power. The INFJ doesn't do this consciously most of the time. It's simply part of their empathetic wiring. But its effect in conflict is remarkable. INFJs also confuse their enemies by being unpredictable. They can shift from gentle and patient to assertive and razor-sharp in a single moment, usually at the exact time when their adversary least expects it. Because INFJs avoid conflict whenever possible, people assume they won't fight back. But when they do, it is precise, articulate, and devastatingly accurate. They don't lash out emotionally. They strike with facts, truth, and a clarity that shatters illusions. Their words land with a level of psychological force that comes from observing quietly, understanding deeply, and speaking only when they're absolutely certain. Another genius move INFJs make is using their enemies' expectations against them. Since people often assume INFJs are naive, shy, or overly soft-hearted, they reveal more than they should in front of them. The INFJ listens, remembers, and pieces everything together like a detective. Later, when necessary, they can expose contradictions, lies, or patterns of behavior using the other person's own words. This leaves manipulative individuals stunned, sometimes even humiliated, because they never realized the INFJ was paying such close attention. There is also a natural mystique around INFJs that works to their advantage. Their inner world is so private that enemies can't get a clear read on them. They don't know what the INFJ is thinking, how much they know, or what they plan to do. This uncertainty breeds anxiety. People who rely on control become nervous when they can't predict their target. INFJs create this confusion effortlessly simply by being themselves, intelligent, emotionally deep, yet powerfully enigmatic. Another way INFJs outsmart their enemies is by understanding the bigger psychological picture. They see the root of someone's behavior, not just the surface. They can identify insecurity disguised as arrogance, fear hidden behind aggression, jealousy masked as criticism, or manipulation presented as kindness. This insight allows INFJs to choose the perfect angle to disarm the threat. Sometimes they respond with compassion that the enemy didn't expect, which throws them off balance. Other times, they hold a firm boundary that stops the pattern dead in its tracks. And in the rare cases where an INFJ decides someone is genuinely dangerous or toxic, they can disappear from that person's life with an eerie level of finality. No drama, no warning, no explanation, leaving the other person confused by the sudden loss of access. INFJs don't outsmart their enemies through aggression, deception, or manipulation. They do it through psychological clarity, emotional intelligence, patience, and an ability to see the invisible parts of people. They win not by playing the game harder, but by understanding the game better than anyone else. And because they operate quietly, creatively, and intuitively, their enemies often don't even realize they've been outmaneuvered until it's already over. Another powerful but often overlooked way INFJs outsmart their enemies lies in their ability to emotionally zoom out. While most people get swept up in the heat of the moment, the INFJ mind instinctively views conflict like it's happening on a wide cinematic screen. They detach just enough to analyze the situation without drowning in it. Their enemy, on the other hand, reacts impulsively, emotionally, or defensively, revealing far more than they intend to. This emotional distance gives the INFJ leverage because they can make rational, strategic moves while their adversary is too entangled in their own feelings to see clearly. INFJs also have a skill that feels almost supernatural to others. They can sense when someone's story doesn't match their energy. If a person's words sound confident, but their emotional aura feels shaky, INFJs take note. If someone tries to appear innocent, but their presence radiates tension, INFJs pick it up instantly. While their enemies rely on surface-level manipulation, tone, phrasing, fake sincerity, the INFJ relies on their ability to feel the truth underneath. This internal lie detection system allows them to navigate conflict with uncanny accuracy, spotting deception before it fully takes shape. There's also an intellectual sharpness that INFJs reveal only when needed. Usually, they let others speak more, exposing their thoughts, patterns, and intentions. But once the INFJ decides to respond, they do so with laser precision. They can dismantle an argument by pointing out the one flaw the other person hoped no one would notice. They can summarize someone's entire pattern of behavior in a single sentence that hits with shocking accuracy. Their ability to articulate what others can only vaguely sense is disarming, because their words feel like a mirror held up to someone's soul. Enemies often freeze, stunned by how deeply the INFJ seems to understand them, sometimes better than they understand themselves. INFJs also use misdirection in a subtle psychological way. They allow their enemies to focus on the wrong thing, perhaps a small detail, a surface-level assumption, or an irrelevant emotional reaction, while the INFJ quietly works on the deeper level where the real outcome is shaped. Their adversary becomes fixated on winning a moment, while the INFJ is focused on winning the entire arc of the situation. This long-game perspective makes their actions confusing, because they move with a purpose that isn't visible until everything snaps together at the end. Another genius tactic INFJs employ is letting their enemies underestimate their strength until the exact moment it matters. They rarely show their full insights, boundaries, or emotional resilience up front. Instead, they reveal it in layers, testing how far the other person will go, observing their psychology and motion. By the time the INFJ finally asserts themselves, they already know exactly where their opponent is mentally weakest. The confrontation, if it even happens, feels one-sided, because the INFJ is speaking from a position of clarity while the other person is still trying to make sense of what just shifted. INFJs also confuse adversaries by refusing to give them the reactions they expect. Manipulators often rely on predictability. They count on people becoming angry, defensive, flustered, or guilty. But INFJs break that pattern entirely. They may remain calm in a moment designed to provoke them, smile when someone expects them to crumble, or agree with a statement that was meant to intimidate them, shattering the manipulator's script. This throws the enemy into psychological disarray. People who depend on emotional control panic when their usual methods don't work. They become sloppy, transparent, and desperate, revealing even more of their strategy without realizing it. INFJs are also good at delivering consequences that are subtle, yet deeply effective. They don't always confront directly. Sometimes they simply pull back their energy, their attention, their warmth, or their support. To an enemy who thrives on having access or influence, this quiet withdrawal becomes a punishment far louder than anything verbal. It disrupts the emotional ecosystem the manipulator was depending on, leaving them confused about what went wrong and why their methods suddenly feel powerless. INFJs can turn emotional patterns into psychological maps. They don't just remember what happened. They remember the emotional logic behind someone's behavior. They see what triggers a person, what soothes them, what they crave, what they fear, what they try to hide, and what they try to project. This gives the INFJ a complex, multi-layered understanding of their opponent's psyche. When conflict arises, the INFJ doesn't guess. They move based on insight. Their actions seem to land with uncanny precision because they know exactly which emotional pressure points to avoid and which ones to press if necessary. INFJs can endure discomfort longer than most people can imagine. They can remain calm in chaos, patient during manipulation, and collected during emotional storms. Their endurance is not passive but strategic. While their enemy runs out of tactics, energy, or composure, the INFJ remains steady, watching everything unfold. And when the dust settles, the INFJ is the one still standing, quiet, observant, and already thinking 3 moves ahead. INFJs also outsmart their enemies by refusing to reveal the full extent of their emotional intelligence. While others might openly display their intuition or show their hand too early, INFJs keep their perceptiveness tucked away like a hidden blade. They allow people to believe they've successfully manipulated the situation, all while quietly gathering emotional data, connecting subtle patterns, and mapping out the deeper truth. When the moment of clarity arrives, the INFJ doesn't need to argue or expose everything. One calm, perfectly timed insight is enough to unravel the other person's entire strategy. The enemy is left stunned, not because the INFJ fought harder, but because they understood the psychological game on a level the other person didn't even realize existed. Another quiet advantage INFJs possess is their ability to redirect energy without confrontation. Instead of meeting hostility with hostility, they shift the emotional atmosphere entirely. Through a subtle change in tone, a deliberate pause, or an unexpected calmness, they guide the interaction into terrain where their enemy feels out of place and off balance. Manipulative people thrive in chaos and intensity, but INFJs create environments of emotional clarity where dishonesty can't breathe. In these moments, the INFJ doesn't attack. they illuminate. And nothing confuses an enemy more than being forced to face themselves under a light they can't control.